It was the numbers on this thing are just jaw-dropping. From the New York Post, some 200,000 people turned out to honor Charlie Kirk Sunday, of course, including President Trump. State Farm Stadium has a max capacity of 73,000 people, filling up within hours. Doors opened at 8 a.m. yesterday. And there were lines to get in hours before that, I think before sunup, well before sunup out there. They say Andrew Colvett, who is Charlie Kirk's kind of executive producer and aide de camp on his radio show, they say that their streaming numbers were just unbelievable. They think that there were hundreds of millions of streamers worldwide. And that's just, what they could count were domestic. They said worldwide, probably much, much more. Turning Point's organization said 200,000 people registered for the event. They said security out there was, next level. I mean, obviously with the president being there, but they said it was like a Super Bowl event, that level of security. I know this, starting with my stepmother, she watched the entirety. What did it run? Something like 4 hours, Fast Eddie? I heard in its entirety. I will confess I did not watch the entirety of it. I tuned in very specifically to see Erica Kirk and some of the president yesterday. But I didn't see it all. I heard it ran something like 4 hours in total.
I think closer to 5 because, I was checking in after each football game. So, I checked in before the 1 o'clock game, then I checked in after the 1 o'clock game, and then I was like, holy crap. After in the evening game, I think it had just wrapped when we got to Sunday Night Football.
Oh, is that right? I didn't.
Just before then.
It was, I'll say I tuned in just as Erica Kirk began her comments and was in rapt attention for the entirety of it. I posted on X yesterday and other social media that, in my view, what Erica Kirk did yesterday for the Christian faith was something in the modern era anyway, and I don't know what to compare it to exactly. I have some thoughts on this a little later, but I don't know if it's... I don't want to overstate this. I'm not trying to over-exaggerate or overstate it. I don't think I am, and I don't know too many people that would disagree with it. Like a Billy Graham event, maybe, when he would tour the country in his day and fill stadiums and bring people to the Lord. I don't know what you could compare to yesterday. And I don't just mean the size of the thing. Look, from what I'm told, and I didn't pay a lot of attention to it, I'll just say that there were people, and not just people on the left, there were people on our side who were apparently lamenting this event yesterday. This never even crossed my mind. You see, this is funny. It's like my mind does not go where some people on our side's mind go, particularly people who are kind of squishy, people who are... This was a bad day and a bad weekend. This whole event has been very, very bad for people inside the Republican Party who are could you just stick to the fiscal issues? I'm very uncomfortable with the social issues. Could you just, I like the Republican platform when you just stick to fiscal issues. That whole crowd, I've been dealing with those people for a very, very long time. Those of you who are older than me, I know, Rush has been talking about those people. But there was a time when they became sort of the dominant force in the Republican ranks. Think of it. Really, George W. Bush, who I always kind of thought of as an evangelical, but not really. When you look at where we are today, and, people thought George W. Bush was some sort of wingnut because he prayed. Not really. Did you ever hear George W. Bush invoke Jesus? Any of the Bushes, for that matter? No. I'm too young, and I don't really have a frame of reference. I'd have to go back and look at 8 years of Reagan to know exactly what Reagan said about his spiritual walk. I'm not saying he didn't. I don't know. Those of you who do, my apologies. I'm not picking a fight on whether Reagan was a deeply spiritual guy or not. I think he was. Everything I read about him, he was. How much of that in his public discourse, though, is my point. How many times do you remember a leader, a Christian leader, in the White House speaking of Christ? Republican or Democrat? I bet you couldn't fill two hands with it over the last 20 years or more. So I think about the Republican ranks, and I think about John McCain. I think about Mitt Romney. I think about Paul Ryan. the Bushes, and I think to myself, all of them say they were Christians. Barack Obama did too, for that matter. But the Democrats I'm going to set aside for a minute because they tried to boo God out of their party platform. I'm talking about Republicans now. Ever since I've been paying attention to politics, I don't know that the Republican Party has been dominated by people who would call themselves evangelical Christians and invoke the name of Jesus very specifically and say that I, as a Christian, want you to know that the only way to heaven, the only way to eternity, is a repentance of sin and your belief that Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior, that there is one way, He's it, that's it. And if you say that and you believe it and you mean it, that's what a Christian needs to testify to if, in fact, they call him or herself a Christian. How many people in the public space are willing to look into a camera and say that? Oh, well, no, I don't want to be exclusionary. It is exclusionary to the extent that as a Christian, that is the narrow path one must walk to eternal salvation. It's not exclusionary in the sense that you have to adopt it if you don't want. You don't have to. You're under no obligation. It is a gift given freely. But we also are a people of free will. And I was just sort of sitting there thinking to myself, when was the last time that I remember Christ being proclaimed on a public stage like this? I couldn't remember it. If there's one, it's slipping my mind. And then I thought about all the factors of every notable figure in, if you want, conservative politics or Republican politics was gathered there or involved in yesterday. Most of whom don't do that. I mean, outside of this Trump cabinet, most of whom have never really done that. Most members of Congress don't do this. And then I started to think about Erica Kirk specifically, who stood before this audience of millions and said something that I just don't believe most of us have the capacity. And I said on social media, this may be the greatest moment for Christianity in modern history. I can't think of another time, because it causes all of us as Christians to audit our own hearts, and it causes people who don't know anything about the love of Christ to understand and be introduced for the first time to true grace. Number 55.
He wanted to save young men, just like the one who took his life. That young man, on the cross, our Savior said, "Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do." That man, that young man, I forgive him.
Everyone to their feet, of course, in the arena, and I must tell you that your host sat in tears. I sat and wondered to myself, who among us, including me, I asked myself, who could see the love of their life gunned down and within 10 days stand before a crowd of millions and say, I forgive them? We're called as Christians to do it. How many of us are made of that stuff? That display, that moment, I'm probably not capable of quantifying it. I would need to rely on a spiritual leader to do it for me, but that particular moment, in my view, was the most meaningful moment for the Christian faith in generations. Erica Kirk continues to just dazzle at one of the most difficult moments, the most difficult moment I would imagine of her life. More in a moment. No, it's interesting. We had a call during the break, and I wished he'd hung around because I think it's an important point. Gary had made the point that there have been people throughout history that have used their faith and have been total and complete frauds. Yes, that's true. And there will be people in this movement who are complete and total frauds. There always have been. I mean, ultimately, look, you and I are never going to know the hearts of anybody. You can't. Went back and researched, by the way, Reagan, that I could publicly find, quick search, Reagan invoked the name of Jesus, or Jesus Christ, or the man from Galilee in some form or fashion 5 times. So, better than most, but certainly nothing like yesterday. You can't compare anything in modern public. I mean, ironically, Jimmy Carter was probably, and I don't even know, as a man who was as devoutly Christian as he was, I believe Southern Baptist even, I think, and did great work, not as president, but after the fact, with things like Habitat for Humanity. I don't know that Jimmy Carter invoked Christ in his public life the way he did in his private life. Because there was always this attitude that you shouldn't. It's just, and that really is what this boils down to. My point and where I was going with all of this is the Republican Party has always been reticent to speak. People who are Christians who call themselves Republicans have always been reticent to speak because we've been beaten down over the years to believe that if you say that, if you profess Jesus as Lord, this is exclusionary. This is not in keeping with the great traditions of the country, or it turns people off, or they don't really. And I have heard this as long as I've been paying attention to politics. I remember Rush, when I first started listening to him, he would tell the story of going to swanky parties. You know, Rush was becoming very, very famous. And I remember Rush would talk about being invited to places like the Hamptons for cocktail parties. And I started to experience this even a little bit on a local level. As I moved up and moved into bigger cities and markets like Philadelphia in my career, I experienced the same thing Rush used to talk about, which was if you professed your faith and you talked about social issues, if you said things like, I believe that marriage is defined as one man and one woman, I believe abortion is wrong, I think the life of the unborn is worth protecting. When you say things like that, it has been historically true for decades that there are people, forget Democrats, I'm not talking about them. The Republican Party is full of people who said, I don't know, that makes me, can you just ditch the social issue stuff? I'm with you like on everything as it relates to limited government and fiscal issues, but oh gosh, I just don't like it. What I love, at least for now, is, publicly speaking, Charlie Kirk and what's happened to him, and this entire event yesterday has dragged everyone in public life that calls him or herself a Republican. It's dragged them under this tent of faith. It is not to say that everybody who calls themselves a Republican has to proclaim a Christian faith. That is not my suggestion. I don't mean that. I just mean that people who profess their Christian faith as Republicans ought not be cowed or afraid to share the good news. And that is no longer the case, I'm happy to say. Marco Rubio. I mean, I got to tell you, there are people that saw Marco Rubio speaking yesterday and are pretty convinced. I could play this all morning, and I may a little later. I could play for you clip after clip after clip if you didn't watch it. But there are people that say Marco Rubio's speech yesterday may well have made him president of the United States, given what he said. This open embrace of Christ from the stage is like nothing I've ever seen in my life. And I never imagined that I would. And I've told you before in my own personal life, I'm ashamed to say that there were so many years that I had access to a microphone like this, and I was afraid to say it. I won't say that I was actively discouraged from it, but it was always politely understood that, you know what, if you want to cast the broadest net, don't talk about, just leave that stuff to Sunday. And I did for entirely too long. So yesterday was this amazing display. But to Gary, the caller's point, who couldn't hang on, are there frauds in it that are going to try to co-opt it? Of course. That's always been true as well. And only God knows their hearts ultimately. But caveat emptor for sure. More in a minute. I think yesterday what was most remarkable, not surprising, but most remarkable was you know how effective it was from the reaction, the hateful reaction to it. And it was hateful. The New York Times summarizes it probably better than anybody. at least those who hated what happened yesterday. Headline, at Kirk service, an extraordinary fusion of government and Christianity. Now, without ever reading this, you know exactly what that means. An extraordinary fusion of government and Christianity. That's not to be. You see, we're not supposed to fuse government and Christianity. Now, again, let's just say we're not advocating for a state-endorsed religion. No one is suggesting, not Jesus himself, I would submit to you, would suggest that there should be some sort of government-endorsed religion. We are not a theocracy. I'm not advocating for a theocracy. I don't think that there should be any legal document signed that should force you into Christianity. I don't think you should be on bended knee to Christianity. I don't think you have to. Christianity, the beautiful, beautiful nature of Christianity is it is a gift given freely. It is your free will choice to come to Christ or not. You can reject him if you wish. He doesn't. Christ does not recruit people to him by force. Didn't when he was walking the planet, isn't going to start now. So I'll just say for anybody that gets uncomfortable with this conversation, I certainly am not calling for state-sponsored Christianity. All right? But from the New York Times, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, paid tribute to Charlie Kirk by citing the gospel message of the death and resurrection of Jesus. Stephen Miller, Deputy White House Chief of Staff, envisioned a spiritual uprising in Mr. Kirk's wake. Vice President J.D. Vance said Mr. Kirk's influence had reshaped the balance of American politics and traced it back to Mr. Kirk's faith. Because of Mr. Kirk, he said, I have talked more about Jesus Christ in the past 2 weeks than I have my entire time in public office. Now, one might audit themselves and ask why that is. Charlie Kirk has forced a lot of us to ask ourselves, why is that? I mean, I think that there is, and it's also scriptural, you can be obnoxious about it. I think clubbing people over the head about it is not useful or helpful. I think that when it fits, in a moment where people are struggling or where the nation is struggling or there's a dark moment, I think it's apropos and important that one invoke their faith. And a lot of people have just not, Christians in public life have, for whatever reason, not felt like they can publicly bring that forward. I think a dam has broken now. The hatred and the writhing and the contempt for people of faith has gotten so, look, when an assassin who, as Erica Kirk talked about, is swallowed whole by darkness, it is incumbent upon those of us of faith to be a light. Elon Musk said this yesterday when asked, why was Charlie killed? And he boiled it down in essence to that. Charlie was speaking light into darkness. That's what it's about. And when you're confronted with spiritual darkness and wickedness, and this country is, there's no doubt about it, why not? Why not as a public official invoke light? Be a light. Be a Matthew 5:14. What's wrong with it? What can it hurt? Why is it more objectionable than a guy assassinating a guy because he doesn't like men pretending to be women? And when I say doesn't like, I mean speaks out against and tries to show young men that there is a better way. Let me go to what I was talking about. I've invoked it now a couple of times, specific to Marco Rubio in number 49.
Look, I think he had a tremendous impact on young Americans in general. I think he had a very special and direct impact on young men in this country. That's one of the greatest developments I've seen. It's been very positive. I think we remember him for that. I think we remember him for constantly saying, you want to live a productive life, get married, start a family, love your country. These are powerful messages. But I hope many who are watching, I imagine there are people watching here tonight that didn't know much about Charlie Kirk until 11 days ago. Maybe they were disengaged from politics. Maybe they were partially engaged. I hope one of the things they take from this is that the movement Charlie Kirk led and started and gave fuel to was about politics, but not only about politics. It was deeper. It was broader. And I would say that, taking the liberty, but I'm confident he would agree, one of the things he wants us to take away from this, from all of this, is the following: his deep belief that we were all created, every single one of us, before the beginning of time, by the hands of the God of the universe, an all-powerful God, who loved us and created us for the purpose of living with him in eternity. But then sin entered the world and separated us from our Creator. And so God took on the form of a man and came down and lived among us. And he suffered like men. And he died like a man. But on the third day he rose unlike any mortal man. And to prove any doubters wrong, he ate with his disciples so they could see, and they touched his wounds. He didn't rise as a ghost or as a spirit, but as flesh. And then he rose to the heaven, but he promised he would return, and he will. And when he returns, because he took on that death, because he carried that cross, we were freed from the sin that separated us from him. And when he returns, there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and we will all be together, and we are going to have a great reunion there again with Charlie and all the people we love. Thank you, and God bless you.
Wow. I mean, that was the Secretary of State, ladies and gentlemen. You were not watching a Sunday revival at your church. That was the Secretary of the United States. Secretary of State of the United States. Now, of course, New York Times hated that. Again, this is an extraordinary, and when they say extraordinary, they mean, ooh, awful, fusion of government and Christianity. Now, let me ask you this sincere question. If Marco Rubio were an Islamist, like Ilhan Omar, do you think if he stood up there and talked about Allah, Fast Eddie, do you think that the New York Times would write an extraordinary fusion of government and Islamism?
No, of course not.
Why not? Sincere question. I'm just asking. Yeah. Why do you think they wouldn't write it?
No, if I were to guess, I'd think they'd avoid it altogether unless they had an agenda to amplify the fact that, like Islam was used in that way. Yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, they're writhing at CNN. Give me number 43. Listen to this reaction.
President Trump arrived here at State Farm Stadium just moments ago. The crowd actually erupted into a round of applause and chants of USA. These tens of thousands of attendees have spent several hours now listening and engaging in these remembrances of Charlie Kirk. We have heard people speak in very personal terms about how they knew Charlie Kirk and also touching on his deep connection with his Christian faith. One thing that we have heard repeatedly from speakers is this description of Charlie Kirk's assassination as turning him into a martyr for the Christian movement, but also his conservative movement that he had really championed. That is something that has been echoed by speaker after speaker. And so many of these speeches have really been grounded in resolve and not very much anger. But some of the speeches have started to take a more political tone. There were two conservative activists who spoke about in more political nature, saying that they need to make sure that Democrats remember Charlie Kirk's name going forward. But for so many here who have gathered here at this stadium, they simply want to find ways to remember Charlie Kirk, to honor his life. President Trump is expected to speak in the coming hours, a speech that CNN has been told is expected to be personal in tone, that he has worked on personally in the lead up to this speech. There are also a host of other administration officials who have really credited Charlie Kirk with helping bring them into President Trump's MAGA movement, including Vice President J.D. Vance. There are other people who are on hand here.
I think there is something there's just something tremendous about that woman's whole narrative being drowned out by praise music. You can barely hear her because of the praise music. I was struck by the message, not just on faith yesterday at the Kirk Memorial. I was struck by the number of people who were just speaking into young people's lives about marriage and family and being good people. J.D. Vance talking about marriage and family in number 51. Take a listen.
Charlie brought the truth that young people deserved a stake in the future and that they deserved to have a voice. He brought the truth that marriage and family were the highest callings, far more important than any job or educational credential. He brought the truth that our nation would fade unless it brought order to its neighborhoods and prosperity to its people. He brought the truth that life was precious and we must fight to protect it at all stages and at all times. But most of all, Charlie brought the truth that Jesus Christ was the King of Kings and that all truth flowed from this first and most important one.
That's all good. It's all good. The bulk of that entire message, and Erica Kirk similarly shared in her message, character. She spoke to men, young men, and she said, she talked about how Charlie honored her every single day, asked, how can I best serve you? She reminded young men, you have a responsibility to lead your homes, but that doesn't mean domineer women. It doesn't mean make women your slave. Respect women. She went on a lengthy monologue about how young men should be and how Charlie was encouraged to lead young men into a new way, out of this dark emptiness, this soulless game playing and, whatever else. There's got a couple of stories today about kind of the whole online world of gaming and the darkness that's swallowing up so many young men, which I think is probably sort of a given. But she's spoken to young men. She's spoken to young women. Listen to Erica Kirk talking to young women in number 54 here.
I was Charlie's confidant. I was his vault. His closest and most trusted advisor, his best friend. I poured into him and loved him so deeply, empowered him, because his love for me drove me to be a better wife. Every day he honored me, and I prayed that I could be the wife that God needed me to be for my husband. Women, I have a challenge for you too. Be virtuous. Our strength is found in God's design for our role. We are the guardians. We are the encouragers. We are the preservers. Guard your heart. Everything you do flows from it. And if you're a mother, please recognize that is the single most important ministry you have.
Now, let me just ask you a question. I mentioned I'm going to be at the Christian Educator Awards this weekend, emceeing that. I know that the teachers in that room teach the things that you've just heard people like J.D. Vance and Erica Kirk speak. Is your public school advocating for those values? Set Christianity aside. Is your public school advocating for those values? When was the last time you think, and I don't mean to besmirch everyone in education, I am certain that privately there are a good number of teachers who still feel the way Vice President Vance and Erica Kirk spoke, and they believe that in their private lives. How many teachers in public classrooms are saying those things to students today when we're just talking about character? I was, in the last hour, I didn't forget, I didn't want to get distracted. My son, my oldest son, hates the idea of college, did not want to go to college and decided not to go to college. In fact, decided to kind of make his own way. He's got his own place. He's not far from the house, but, he's got his own apartment. He's making his own way. He got a job at a bank. He really, really wanted to advance in the bank, but again, no degree. Right, so he started in retail banking, and then he got very, very interested in it. He's been on fire for it, and he decided he wanted to try to make his way into commercial lending and credit analysis and things like that. He saw that as sort of the next logical step. Now, for people that are in banking, that's not, credit analysts are not. I'm not besmirching you, but it's not. You're not splitting atoms, okay? But ultimately, as good a kid as he is and as hard as he's worked, the bank told him, hey, you're going to need a degree. Well, he's working 2 jobs right now, and he ultimately decided, okay, well, if that's in order to get back to this place, I'm going to have to leave the bank. He just quit the bank, and he's going to go work somewhere else so he can make a little more money so that he can get back through school and get the necessary degree to get back. But my point in telling you this story is not to cry in my beer for my son. It's to tell you that I was talking with a friend of mine about AI this weekend, and I thought to myself, Nate Bargatze, who's a hilarious comic, he's on tour right now, and he was talking about AI. He said, I thought that's what college was supposed to be. I heard him do this riff this weekend, and it clicked with my son's story. AI literally does everything for us, Fast Eddie. What the hell does AI do but teach you and tell you everything you need to know about anything anymore? Literally. What's the point? Like, in a way, Nate Bargatze's correct. AI has supplanted college, in my view. Like, this whole idea of higher education and, like, what can you learn in college for the most part, unless it's open heart surgery that AI can't spit out for you? Sincere question.
No, aside from going to the football games and learning abroad just to do it, I don't know. I really don't.
So, and you say, where are you going, Stigall? My point is there a reason a bank couldn't promote my kid today? Given the state of education and given the state of AI and things like that? No, the bank could teach him. But what you can't teach, what AI can't teach, what college hasn't taught, what public school hasn't taught, Christian educators are, and homeschool is character. I think that AI is going to reinvent education, necessarily. I think it's going to force a long overdue overhaul of how students are taught and what is needed. It is very, very clear to me that schools now we must, as a country, start to insist that values are emphasized and philosophy is emphasized and civics are emphasized. Private schools, I think, already are, and if they're not, they should be engaged in things like this. Public schools, of course, will be the last to reform. But it's clear our education model in this country is obsolete. And the things our education system should be teaching are the things that Vice President Vance and Erica Kirk are speaking about. That's my point. Yes, I know, and a gentleman said it a minute ago. I'm not picking on him. He's correct to make the point. I've heard it. I heard it from, as I said, I heard it from my folks who watched almost the entirety of this memorial service yesterday. Fast Eddie, when they say, oh, he made it political, Trump made it political, he's going to, my dad even said it to me yesterday, he goes, they're going to get mad at him, he made it political. And I got kind of frosted at my dad. What do you mean he got political? Well, he brought up politics, he started talking about. Is anybody surprised that he did? Should he have not? Do you think Charlie would have objected to President Trump talking about the politics of the day? Now, I don't know. It kind of depends. I understand that some people, my dad said, they're going to get mad at him. He went political. My stepmother said, he went on a little too long. And I looked at the both of them and I said, are you just meeting this guy? Are you not familiar with who you voted for? Fast Eddie. He got political and he went on a little too long, they said. I couldn't believe it. I was like, where have you been since 2015?
Yes, I am sorry to disagree, but yeah, I mean, why? Unfortunately, sadly, why was Charlie Kirk killed? It was political why he was killed, right?
Charlie Kirk was the best blend of turning politics into a tent revival. That was the remarkable thing about it. Charlie did both. I was explaining to a friend of mine what Charlie did that was remarkable was he brought so many thousands of young people into the proverbial tent under the auspices of debating politics. And then what he actually gave them was the eternal salvation message, the gospel message of Christ. It was, and he didn't do it deceptively. It wasn't a rope-a-dope, but that was inevitably what he did. And so, yeah, for President Trump to show up and talk about his agenda and to talk about politics, well, give me number 60 here.
Every single American should take a long, hard look at the twisted soul and dark spirit of anyone who would want to kill a young man as good as Charlie, to kill anybody, but to kill a man like this, he didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve this. Our country didn't deserve this. And anyone who would make excuses for it are just out of their mind. Charlie's murder was not just an attack on one man or one movement. It was an attack on our entire nation. That was a horrible attack on the United States of America. It was an assault on our most sacred liberties and God-given rights. The gun was pointed at him, but the bullet was aimed at all of us. That bullet was aimed at every one of us. Indeed, Charlie was killed for expressing the very ideas that virtually everyone in this arena and most other places throughout our country deeply believed in. But the assassin failed in his quest because Charlie's message has not been silenced. It now is bigger and better and stronger than ever before, and it's not even close.
Yeah, and President Trump reminded us that Charlie started by setting up a card table on a campus with a sign that said, "Big government sucks." I mean, that is Charlie's entree into every discussion, was politics. The President of the United States is obviously an inherently political office. The President is going to use the opportunity to talk about politics and his agenda and grieve Charlie at the same time. That should not be a surprise. So the idea that he used the opportunity to be political, I mean, it doesn't bother me. Of course it bothers the left. And why do you think it bothers the left? Because there were hundreds of millions of people tuned in. That's why. You know, as conservatives who discern the cadences of history, we know Christian revivals, they don't spring forth without a cause. They typically come from really turbulent eras. Societal disorder is usually met by faith head on, and this is not the first time it's happened in this country. Movie not too long ago, remember the Jesus Revolution of the 70s? That's one of the most vivid and most recent illustrations. That took root in the late 60s, or post-late 60s. The Vietnam protests, the erosion of trust in institutions, widespread drug use, a deep yearning for spiritual depth, beyond hollow rituals. Young people seeking genuine communion with Christ. And it was far from the constraints of conventional churches. Billy Graham's crusades were really instrumental in illuminating that path. It transformed a longing into a real evangelical resurgence. California's governor at that same time, Ronald Reagan. He contended with communism's subtle encroachments, cultural decay, the drug epidemic. His presidency eventually was marked by, what, the survival of an assassination attempt? And that reflected a broader political realignment, which tied right back to a spiritual tide. It welcomed in Reagan Democrats. Sound familiar? Disenchanted by progressive overreach. Again, very familiar themes. Reagan consistently anchored conservative ideals in Christian belief, affirming that our freedom derives from divine endowment. The echoes in our time today are unmistakable. Barack Obama's tenure advanced a contemporary form of Marxism, which eroded traditional Christian tenets through extraordinarily divisive politics, a hidden war on Israel, excessive regulation like Obamacare, moral ambiguity. The husk, Joe Biden's administration, serving as effectively Obama's unspoken extension, deepened the rift with border disarray, censorship, the war on children, and encroachment on religious freedom. Trump is simply echoing the Reagan era here. Trump is countering this erosion through America First initiatives, grounded in Judeo-Christian principles. He had his own brush with an assassination, which underscores his defiant stand against those bent on unraveling this nation. In this landscape, Charlie Kirk of Turning Point emerged as a contemporary counterpart to a Billy Graham figure, melding scriptural wisdom with political engagement to challenge woke doctrine. Charlie's murder, akin to Martin Luther King Jr.'s martyrdom, has kindled a revival of sorts, and it's unfolding right before our eyes. That memorial, speakers extolling Kirk's synthesis of faith and patriotism, the swelling in church participation, ideological shifts amid the nation's unrest, those present really sensed, and even watching, a spiritual charge, and it was very reminiscent of one of Graham's gatherings, if you ever watched them. From these movements, enduring insights emerge. Revivals flourish. Spiritual voids they're created by cultural collapses. The 60s upheavals birthed the Jesus movement, if you will, the revolution. That's what's going on today. It's dissolving barriers between belief and governance. Billy Graham's influence often appeared peripheral. Kirk's direct challenge to authority reveals revival's need to engage power. We witness this revival unfolding right now. Young hearts drawn to Bible studies, conservatives reclaiming vital institutions, Trump Democrats building coalitions that echo Reagan's in scope and vigor. Faith calls not for passive reflection right now, but for resolute stands against the moral decay of our time. This momentum holds a real potential to realign America with its foundational virtues. And of course, that's provided we stay vigilant and grasp the opportunity in front of us. I have a book on my shelf written a few years ago. I think it's called The Preacher and the Presidents. It's about Billy Graham's influence over multiple administrations. And he had it. It was subtle, but it was there. You know my middle son, who I told you about a couple of weeks ago, those of you regular listeners of the show? He just tattooed a Bible verse on his forearm over the weekend. And again, I think I shared that with you. Maybe I shared that with you last week. Not always a couple of you let me know. You let me hear it about the tattoo thing. I'm not admonishing you if you got a tattoo. I'm just saying I'm not the biggest fan of them on my kids. You get it, but whatever. They're of an age now. He's 19. He can do what he wants. But it's a Bible verse. Matthew 6:21, I believe. It's about basically where you put your energies. Your character is going to reflect where you're invested. It's scriptural. And it's a reminder to him that he wants to invest and put his time into Christ. And he doesn't ever want to get off field. He doesn't want to get off track. He doesn't want to start making his earthly pursuits, monetary pursuits, whatever, the right house, the right car. He doesn't ever want to make that his focus because he knows that will take him off track. That scripture verse resonated with him. And I'm convinced in large measure what we're seeing happen right now culturally because of what this killer did. I am convinced that this killer drove my son into a new way of thinking about his future. And so in many ways, this murderer, he has infused a revival in this country. Erica Kirk talked about it yesterday. There's a revival. And I think Tucker said something similar yesterday, that it's a tale as old as time. Somebody who starts to gain popularity, desperate people to silence them think the only thing to do is to kill them. And ultimately, we all know what happens when you try to kill someone who's popular. You do only make them martyrs, and their message only elevates. This killer only grew a nation of Charlies. And reflection. And an investment in the stand against the moral decay of the country. It's a remarkable thing we're living. God is in it.
The Chris Stigall Show Podcast.